My name is, according to the military, Francis Milo House. Today is October the 22nd, 2013. I was born of what I call goodly parents. Religious, caring, and cared about their children. I remember several experiences both with my dad and my mother. My mother had what we did not know was at the time a slight case of epilepsy. And my dad, in his very careful, methodical way, whenever she would have an attack, would rub her arms and sit there. It may take hours, it may take just a minute or two to get through the spell, but he would sit there very patiently. My father was also very patient. He was a tall man, very conscientious of his work, which was an auto mechanic and a farm equipment mechanic. Of my mother, who was a very wonderful mother, who was very caring about her children. My sister Lorraine and my younger sister Betty. Loving. My father loved me. He loved Lorraine and Betty. But I was the closest to him, and I think I loved him the most. She cared for her children and did the best she knew how to raise us. Be careful. Be careful in all your doings that you may do. Eat the decisions that you made. The very first thing I remember as a child, I was about 3 years old. We lived at Promontory on the Drive farm. The school teacher lived with us. And the school teacher and Lorraine, who was one of her students, decided one morning that they wanted to take me to school with them. So they asked Mother if it would be permissible, and she said yes, but be careful. So we started out, the school teacher on one side, and Lorraine on the other, holding my hand, and I can remember them both swinging me and walking me to school, which was about 2 blocks away from our house. When I got tired, they picked me up and took turns carrying me. The next thing I remember, we had gone up to Promontory Station, which is where the meeting of the rails took place now. As we were coming back, we were up there visiting some people by the name of Houghton. And as we were on our way back down, which we were in the valley, they were up on the side of the mountain, the road was quite rough. Dad had taken a shortcut and there was a lot of gravel there. When we got home, he opened the door. Lorraine wasn't there. She had been when we left. They both about went crazy, worrying. And they jumped back in the car, they shoved me in, and started back up the road. And about halfway up between, they saw Lorraine sitting at the side of the road just screaming and bawling. It was dark. You could hear the coyotes howling. And she was scared. I remember a few years later, Dad telling me, reminding me of that incident and telling me at the time, always make sure all your doors are closed. Don't jump at anything until you look through and analyze it. That was the best instructions my dad ever gave me. Before you leave, make sure your doors are closed. That no one can come up behind you and say, hey, you didn't do this. My parents were poor. Most of you, at least in this time and age, have no idea what it is to be poor. I was born during the Great Depression. We had a dry season. The grain didn't mature properly, and it was very hard to make a living. My dad, being the type of person he was, had decided that he had to have a better life for his family than what there was on the farm during the Depression time. And he made arrangements with a gentleman to buy the farm. They already had the neighboring farm, and they figured between the two they could make a go of it. And so they sold the farm to Dad. And after a short time, they found out they couldn't make the payments. He came to my father and said, Clay, which was my father's name, is there any way we can solve this dilemma so we don't have to turn it back to you because we want to keep it? He asked him, can you make just the interest payment? And he said, yes, I'm sure we can do that. And Dad said, then you make the interest payment until this depression ends. It's got to stop sometime. When it does, you start making the payments and pay me for the farm. That was the type of person my father was. He treated everyone the same. He had done enough work on farm equipment that he knew how to rebuild engines. He knew how to diagnose problems with them. We moved to Brigham City, and after we moved to Brigham, he got a job in a place called Brigham Auto. And there he made a good living for the times that was during the Depression. During that time, we worked for $1 a day. My father had worked for $1 a day on the railroad during one winter, the first winter we were there. He worked the snowplow running between Brigham City and Preston, Idaho. He made $1 a day. I was working in beet fields as a young person. We all had to work. We all had to furnish. I got $1 a day. It was hard work out in the fields. It was hard work topping beets, thinning sugar beets and thinning sugar beets, weeding the garden patches of the farms, picking the vegetable, corn, beans and such, picking them. It was mighty hot days doing it. But that's how we made it go during the Depression. It took the entire family working to do it. We never went without a meal that I can ever remember of. My dad graduated from the 8th grade. My mother also. Dad, out Promontory, where the farm was, Mother in Willard, where she lived. It's as high as either one of them went to. Very few people got any better education at that time than the 8th grade. It's kind of a comical thing that happened, and it isn't either. My older sister, Lorraine, as we left the farm, she was about 3 years older than me. We got to Brigham, moved to Brigham City, but prior to that, while we were still on the farm, as a person who was in the mother's womb, Mother was living in Willard at the time with her mother and dad, my grandmother and grandfather Barker. Dad was out on the farm, still running it until he could move to Brigham. I was born preemie. Communications, the way they were at the time, was somebody would send a letter, or somebody that was traveling through would stop and relay a message to you. So anyway, they sent a letter to my dad that I had been born. Dad left the farm immediately and came right down to Willard to find out that because they thought I was going to die, and I fooled them, I was still alive, my grandfather had named me. And he couldn't think of anything else in a hurry, so he named me Francis Milo House. The Francis being what my father's first name was. When Dad got to Willard and he found out what I had been named, he was so angry at my grandfather that he turned around and went back to the farm with my mother, Lorraine, and myself as a preemie baby. While on the farm, Dad would carry me around in the bib of his overalls in order to keep me warm. He worked on the farm during this time, and he hadn't left the farm yet. And he would carry me around. Later on, the doctors told him that was probably the only thing that saved me and kept me alive. At that time, overalls had a big bib in them, in the front, where the farmers and that would put wiping rags, would put all kinds of things in there. And Dad would put me in that bib of his overalls and carry me around all day with him while he was out working. Later on, the doctor said that was probably the only thing that kept me alive, was the heat from my father's body. Kept the blood circulating and kept me going. And here I am, as big a nuisance as I am today. Today I am 88 years old. Believe me, that's old. It's getting old. People just don't realize how it feels. We had left one Thanksgiving time to go out to Granddad and Grandmother houses out on their farm and for Thanksgiving dinner. As we were going out, I was about 6 years old, on the road between where Thiokol is today and Willard, there was a swamp that the road had been built across through the middle of it. It was dirt roads, and as you traveled along, being 6 years old, here I was bouncing around in the back of the car, and all of a sudden, I was thrown right up against the top of the car and knocked back onto the floor. And I looked and asked my dad, what in the world was that? Before he could answer, Mother said, oh, we hit a bridge that goes across the swamp here. Don't be worried about it. We'll get across. Well, we went on out to there to that. As we were coming back from Thanksgiving dinner, we got to where the old Stinky Springs is, but it was about 7 miles west of Corinne. And at that point, we were in our old car that wasn't getting along too well, and chugging along, and all of a sudden, bang, bang, bang. This was about 10 o'clock at night. So while we were coming back, it's dark. You're a long ways away from where homes are. There is no one around. And all of a sudden, bang, bang, bang at the engine. Dad opened the door to the car, and here was the wolves and coyotes, just a howling like mad. Mother, hurry up and close that door. We don't want them in here with these kids. So Dad got out, raised the hood on the car, got underneath, dropped the pan from under the car out in the middle of this nowhere with the wild animals around. Wasn't like it is today. There was a lot of them. And he hurriedly undid the crankshaft, shoved it up, took the spark plug out so it couldn't fire anymore, put the pan on, poured the oil back in, and we headed back for Brigham City. That was one of the scariest experiences I can remember of ever happening. We all knew, we had been told many times as kids, you don't get out after dark, you stay in the house or stay in the car. We knew that, and so we did. Dad was all alone out under that car. I know he had to be frightened also. She read stories, or told us stories. She played games with us. She did about everything she could think of, I think, because it took a good 2.5, maybe 3 hours to do that. I went to Lincoln Elementary School on the north side of Brigham. Central School was on the south side. Just like high schools today, if you have two of them in one city, you have rivalry between them. There was rivalry between Lincoln and Central schools. As grade school people, you had friends, good friends, and then you had friends that were not so good. Trey was a bully. I mean a real bully. He bullied Richard quite a bit. And he bullied me to a certain extent, and he did Gene. One day, Trey started in on the bullying. We were all 4 of us standing there, and I had taken all of it I wanted to. And as Trey started trying to bully Gene, I doubled up my fist and I hit him hard enough that he fell to the ground, and when he stood back up, he didn't come after me. From that day on, Trey was one of the friends, right with the others, who was friends to everybody. His days of a bully had gone. They were through. He didn't want to get in any more fights where people stood up to him. Played marbles, we played hide and go seek, we played skip the rock, we used to get together as an entire neighborhood. I mean people from 7 years old, 6, 7, 8 years old, up to 10, 12 years old, would get out in the street at night and start playing hide and go seek, or Run Sheepy Run, or Rover Red Rover. And all of these games were fairly active games. I remember hiding in the watering ditch There was still water in it. That was cold. We always used to, even though we were only 6 and 7 years old, we always used to want to hide with the girl. There we would tell stories to each other, and the boys telling the stories was to try to scare the girl. At night we always looked forward to it. We had a curfew. When it got dark, you went in the house. You weren't out in the streets after dark. Not necessarily because it was scary, but you had lessons to get. You had your lessons to do for school the next day. We did have a lot of fun. You were out in the street, everyone was there. 10 years difference in age, all out there playing and having a great time. To try to get the depression to end, the government had stepped in and was hiring people that they called the WPA, Work Project Administration, 3 Cs, the CCCs, Civilian Conservation Corps, that worked up in the mountains, anything to try to get people to work, back to work. In Brigham City, they decided they were going to ask the government for some money to help, and they were going to put in a sewer system. Well, when we moved into our home up on First East, there was an old shanty out behind the house where you had to go to the toilet. And Dad said he wasn't going to have his wife going out there in the city. So he asked me if I would like to help him dig a cesspool. I was about 9, 10 years old at the time, and I could picture myself digging while he was at work, and then digging with him when he came home. And I didn't think that was being very fair to me. So I told him, and he says, "You dig when I dig." We did. We dug that cesspool. He built an indoor bathroom and toilet room in the house. We plumbed it in. During this same time, Halloween came. You didn't trick or treat like that. You'd go to a house, and we had cut notches in a spool, a thread spool. Brigham City had been putting sewers in, and part of the city was hooked up to sewer, part of it wasn't. Come Halloween, started out, 4 of us kids with some of the older kids that lived in the neighborhood, decided to go out Halloween together, scaring people, asking for treats, pulling the notched thread spools on the window, which by the way makes one horrible noise. Then we decided that we'll go out and maybe steal a watermelon or 2, and we got out there with this one gentleman that had an old outhouse. Hey, do you know what would be fun? Let's tip that over. The older guys did. We went along with them. We got out there. They couldn't quite push it over, so the 4 of us helped them, and we got it pushed over. Then we went and hid in the bushes. Before very long, here he came out of the house and went out to go to the outhouse. It was just had turned dark. Your eyes were used to the lights inside. You went out into the dark. You couldn't see very well. And he fell in where the outhouse had been. We started laughing, and we taken off, and found out the next day it wasn't nearly as much fun, because we had to go ride it up and suffer his humiliation by the way he treated us for years. We put it all back together, stand it up, put it back over the tailings, and we were laughing. And he could hear us. He knew who it was. Another year, we also used whitewash and whitewashed some windows. A lady who knew us seen us and recognized one of us. Lime that you mix up in water, it's white, a white paste. We went putting that on the windows. Just to tease them. And so she called the police. Well, the next morning, Mother, Dad, Lorraine, Betty, and I went out to Promontory Point to where Lorraine and Rome, my older sister, and her husband was out on the working on the Southern Pacific Railroad. As we went past Jean's place, here we saw the police car out in front. And I didn't say anything to Dad and Mother. If I had, they would have stopped right then and gone back and found out what was going on. Anyway, we went out. When we came back, Jean was the first one up to the house. Hey, Milo, guess what? The police caught us. We had to go clean the windows. We saved you one. Believe it or not, they saved me the biggest window, and it was right across the street from my dad and mother's house. When she sat inside the house watching me as I scraped so cautiously with a scraper on that whitewash until I had it all off and off of her house. We never went out Halloweening and did anything wrong again. Dad, first telling me how disappointed he was with me, and then Mother coming up to my bedroom while I was sitting up there crying. She came up to my bedroom and told me even further how disappointed she was that she thought that her son had better sense than to do something like that. Sunk in, has remained with me to this day. Think before you do something, just like Dad had said when Lorraine fell out of the car. We got around very well. The four of us did. A lot of people didn't, because the rationing was 4 gallons per week, per person, or per car rather. Jim's dad ran an auto wrecking company. And so when the cars couldn't be fixed, they would take him down there. He would buy the car, he'd tear it down, and guess what? Jim would take all the gas out of it. And we had lots of gas. We could go anywhere we wanted to. 4 of us had 4 gallons a week. That was 16, plus all that he got. And then we used to go take the cars for recreation and go out to the cement plant where they had some large ponds. And we'd go out there and go skinny dipping, go swimming in those ponds. At the same time, we'd take the cars and go out there and shine around in circles with them. And one day we was out there messing around that way, and the county sheriff pulled up, stopped us, and says, "Where do you guys get all your gasoline from?" And we says, "Well, there's 4 of us. We all get 4 gallons. We put it in this car." He stood there and looked kind of bewildered at us, and he said, "Well, all right, there's nothing wrong in that if that's the way you want to use it." But we always had gasoline. That was one of the few groups that did have, because of that wrecking yard. My dad came home from work one day, a mechanic. He was there one evening, and this car drove up, and he went out to service and put gas in it and things, and instead the guy rolled down his window. First thing that he said was, "Can you tell me where I can see a Mormon?" And Dad looked at him kind of funny and figured, well, he's trying to pull a fast one on me. So he says, "I'm a Mormon." And the guy says, "Well, you can't be. You don't have any horns." Dad pointed to the 2 recessed hairline areas here on his forehead and said that's where they were but I had them cut off. They just took off and drove like crazy, and he saw them going down Main Street, never saw the car again. So Dad came home, surprised the family, and says, "Get your clothes ready, we're going to Yellowstone." We all got in the car and headed out for Yellowstone. We got to Yellowstone, went to set the tent up in the campsite, and went to the ranger program there for the park, went to bed. And after we had been in bed just a short time, we heard the pots and pans being beat on and rattled and everything else up the way just a little bit. And I've got to deviate. Some people from New York who had a butler and a cook with them pulled up, stopped, and asked if anyone was using that table right then. And Dad said, "No, not until morning." And the guy says, "Oh, great. Would you mind then if we slept here?" He says, "We've been to all the cafes, restaurants, and that there was no place for them, but they couldn't get back out until morning when the gate unlocked again, because they used to lock the gates shut at dark with padlocks." So we went to the ranger program. They had a son and a daughter. The daughter was just my age, and we both gave each other a lot of stories about ourselves. We all went to bed. We asked them how they were going to sleep, and they says they had it all figured out. So we went to bed, and when they started beating on the pots and pans up above us, first thing we knew, here came a big old bear right through our tent. I mean, he tore the whole one side of the tent out coming through. Jumped over the man and his wife, who were laying on the table sleeping, and the butler and the maid was sleeping on top of the car, trying to. When that bear jumped over the table, went over that man and his wife, they disappeared. The next morning, here was all their camping gear. A new camp stove, new sleeping bags, everything laying there. Dad gathered it all up. They never came back, so he went out to the gate to the rangers and told them what had happened. And they said, "Oh, those people were sitting here waiting to get out when we opened the gate at 8 o'clock. They're long gone. They will never be back. That stuff is all yours." We had a new camp stove and new sleeping bags and everything. I was a sophomore in high school. And I was riding my bike one day, came up between the library and the county courthouse. And there was a wide sidewalk that went all the way across. As you got to the end on First East and Forest Street, the walkway narrowed down to just a standard, and I rode my bike out through the top. I looked to the north for traffic, and Dale Barron, who was riding his bike coming down Forest Street, looked to the south, and we hit head on. As we hit head on, it broke the front wheel out from under my bicycle. In doing it, it whipped my arms, and it broke both wrists. I didn't know it at the time. I asked Dale if he was okay, and he said, "Yes, or you?" And I lied, told him yes. I picked up my bicycle with 2 broken wrists and carried it a block north to our house. Mom called Dad. He came home from work, and he started soaking my arms and wrists in a combination of boric acid and water, and hot water. And when he saw that that was doing no good but swelling, he took me to the hospital. They bound both of my arms, put casts on them both, right to here, both hands. I could wear a sling with my arms right here. That was it. Now, picture this. I'm about 13 or 14. All there was at home was my two sisters and my mother. They had to take me to the toilet. They had to do everything for me. Feed me, you name it. Well, at the same time, I had a date with a young girl. At that time, there was nothing happening between, no sexual involvement with kids. Hadn't even thought about it. And I had this date anyway. And I told Mother to please call Elaine and tell her what had happened, because I had this date with her. So Mother called her, asked her if she still wanted to go, and she says, well, yes. How can we go anywhere? And Mother says, well, I've thought about it. I'll put his wallet in his front pocket if you'll pay for the things with his wallet, and you can go. It wasn't funny, but it was. So anyway, we went to the show. Elaine took my wallet out, paid our way, put the wallet back in my pocket, and we went to the movie. Afterwards, we walked up to the Peach City Ice Cream, and we ordered a banana split. Again, she had to take my wallet out, pay for it, and then she had to feed me. And she fed me the whole bit. When we went home, I walked her up to her place, and I asked her, I says, have you enjoyed the day? And she said, oh yes, I even felt safer. We got our driver's license when we were 16. We didn't have driver's training then. The roads were mostly dirt. There wasn't that many cars like there is today. And Dad would take me out and have me drive, tell me what I was doing, why I did it, and when I didn't do what I was supposed to, he would remind me to do it. The day I got my driver's license was when I turned 16. Dad was working. I left there and went down to my buddy's place in Dad's car. I got him. We picked up one of my other buddies. We decided we were going to go to Willard Peak. I drove my dad's car, that was 2 years old, to Willard Peak and back down, and didn't have a wreck. But I sure had a car full of dust. Dad got just a little bit unhappy about it and told me that I better get some money saved up so that I could get myself a car, because he wasn't going to let me take his. Well, I had some, and so I asked my best friend, Eugene Burroughs. He and I pooled what money we had, It ended up being about $20 each. And we bought an old 1929 Chevrolet, a 1938, about 2 years before I went in the service. We had to do some work on it, and we pulled the floorboard out. At that time, the floorboards were wood. And we pulled the front floorboard out, took the transmission apart, fixed it, put it back in, and we used to drive that car around with no floorboard. We could see the road going under us, 40 miles an hour. It was fun. I was the used car mechanic for Central Chevrolet when I was 15 years old. And so anyway, we drove that around to all over town. One of our friends, we cut new ones and put them in. When we wanted to, we'd take them out when we wanted them out.
Right.
If we had slid, we would have gone right under the car, because there was nothing there to protect us. Well, we saw the one friend, Jim's sister, and her girlfriend. We stopped to give them a ride. Sure, we'd like to go for a ride, so we went. Took them over down past the old sugar factory, down the water lane across, up towards. They got out and started walking. Well, it was about a half a mile up to where the train station is in Brigham. And by the time they got to the train station and we were still walking with them, they says, "You really were out of gas, weren't you?" We says, "We sure were." We went up, walked up to my dad to my place. I woke Dad up, asked him if I could take his car, and if I could take the 5-gallon can of gasoline that he always kept there, because we had run out of gas with the car. And he says, "Yeah, go ahead." So we took it, went down, put gas in it, got it started, drove it back up. By then it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and we had to be to school. We went to Midway Island. We got to the island of Midway about 8 months, I guess, after the Japanese had bombed it and fought for it. We were stationed there with the squadron, the F4Us, of which the SBD was never in use. And so I didn't go up, the plane didn't. But the fighters were up all the time. And then we left there. We went back to Hawaii in a 2-engine transport plane. We got about halfway between and we ran a tropical storm. Both engines on the plane cut out. The plane got down to where you could sit there and look out the windows. By the way, we had all had to throw all of our gear out. We didn't have a spare set of clothes, underclothes, nothing. Everything that was personal to us was in the ocean. And it kept losing power and getting down closer to the water. We were gliding, and we were coming in for a crash into the waves. The waves were had got to the point where they were lapping the wings, and one engine caught hold. And it raised us up to where we were just at the top of the waves. The other engine caught hold. So then we got up and we ended up in Honolulu. There we boarded an aircraft carrier and headed out for the South Seas. I gained my testimony of the church on our way from there to our drop-off point, which was, anyway, to the Marshall Islands. And While there, I sat under the wing and read the book of the robe. And I don't know what there was in that book at the time, but it cemented my testimony of the church. And I have no questions that it is not the true church. We landed Majuro Atoll in the Marshall Islands. Now, an atoll is a top of a range of undersea mountains that makes a circle and has a little inlet coming into it, and in the middle of that is a lagoon. From there was where I began flying the most, in the back seat of the SBD. We would go over some of the Japanese-held smaller islands on the atoll. And if we saw that they were building any runways or anything, any buildup of stuff, we would firebomb them, drop firebombs on them. The pilot would fire his cannons on the way down. He would drop the firebombs, and I would strafe as we were going away to try to keep them from shooting us. One day, we went up he came over and he says, "Marlo, I've got to go up and go for a spin around the atoll. Do you want to come with me?" And I said, "Sure." Okay, we took off. We got up there and had flown over the first part of the lagoon, just, maybe 50 miles. And he says, "Would you like to fly it?" I said, "Sure." And his hands shot in the air and he said, "It's yours." I'd never flown a plane in my life. And here was a dive bomber. Suddenly the pilot with his arms in the air and says, "It's yours, fly it." What he didn't know is that all the time we had been flying, I had had my hand on the joystick that was in the rear seat, that if the pilot was killed, I could fully get it down. And feeling what he did with the pedals, the ailerons. One for each side of the tail, and one to work it this way. So move the flaps on the back of the wings. I was getting some training in case something happened if we did pick up one of those shells and we started down. Or if he was killed, I could get us back. So anyway, I flew it all the way around the atoll, distance about 300 miles. And we come back and he says, "Do you want to land it?" "Sure." Okay. I radioed in for permission to land. We started down. We got to where I figured the wheels were about 6-8 inches off the ground. And he says, "I'll take it from here." And he sat it on the ground, and I asked him how much distance there was, and he says, 6 to 10 inches. He says, "You were right close." And good. Well, I had made good friends with Lieutenant Marmon. We spent a lot of time up there together. And what I didn't know is that he had gone directly to the CO and told the CO what had happened. I got a call that afternoon from the CO to come in and see him. He went in and he offered me the opportunity. He says, "Would you like to go back to the States and go to flight school?" Potato patch, falling out of the plane. No, I really don't want to. I will if I am ordered to, but I really don't want to. And he says, "That's all I wanted to know." He says, "If you want to go, there's a plane leaves here this afternoon for the States." and you can go to flight school. Sorriest experience of my life that I didn't. But that's what happens when you're a teenager. You don't think ahead that much. We went from there to Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands. Just a small group of islands, Solomon Islands, the Marshall Islands. There's a couple of other groups of islands there. Most of them are inhabited. We came back to the States from Kwajalein. We boarded or got off of the troop ship in San Francisco and on a train that took us to San Diego to the base. And at there we had our choice. We could stay West Coast duty or we could go East Coast until the end of the war. I stood behind the first sergeant and I heard him say he wanted West Coast duty. I applied for East Coast duty. I went back there and found out that the squadron had gone to Cherry Point, North Carolina. And I met Lieutenant Mormon, found out Lieutenant Mormon was back there also. Lieutenant Mormon and his wife had Jesse Benson, had Jesse and I come there for Sunday dinner every Sunday, and we'd spend the afternoon visiting and such. One day Jess and I was sitting there it was after hours, and we were just sitting there, and Lieutenant Mormon came up. And he says, "Hey, you guys, if you will go to the CO tomorrow, you can be discharged." We had spent our time overseas. Our planes had been up to Iwo Jima, and Jess and I were both mechanics. We both knew engines pretty well. And his cousin was being discharged the same day. And so we decided that we'd overhaul his car so he'd get home, because it was in pretty bad shape. During those 3 days, we overhauled his car and went out to try it out. We ended up down at New Bern, North Carolina, and got into the black section. During that time, in the history of the U.S., if you were a white person in a black area, your life was in jeopardy. Well, we didn't know that that's where we were getting until we were there. And we saw this one black guy standing by the road, the side of the street. And we pulled up, and I says, "Could you tell us how we can get back to Bogue Field?" Where we were both stationed right by them. And he looked at me, he says, "White boy, you isn't from around here, is you?" And I says, "No, I'm from Utah." And he says, "Okay, I'll tell you how to get out of here. But you get out of here and don't come back again." He said, "Your life isn't worth 2 cents if you get stopped someplace else." When we heard about it, we were at Cherry Point, North Carolina, we was going to have mutual. The LDS all gathered, the active ones had gathered there and was having it. Over the loudspeakers came, "Japan has surrendered." We immediately ended mutual, went out into the street, and here they were forming a snake dance. You line up one behind the other and take hold of the other one's hips in front of you, and you start marching as much as you can. We ended up going all over Cherry Point, North Carolina. Now that's a large base. It's the largest Marine Corps base in the United States. Saying we did everything. That snake dance went in and out of the barracks, up and down the streets. We went everywhere on that base until we all had walked so far we couldn't walk any further and called it off. We caught the bus to go back to Bogue Field. We went back to Bogue Field, and it was just a day or two after that when we were up at Cherry Point for something, and Lieutenant Mormon came and found us and told us to go and could get our discharge papers. It took a few days to come across the nation on the train then. Pulled into Ogden the 25th of November. I arrived in Ogden Thanksgiving morning at the train station. I called Lorraine on the telephone, who lived on 5th Street in Ogden at the time, Lorraine and Earl. And they says, "Where are you?" Because I asked them what they were going to do for Thanksgiving. She says, "Oh, we're going up to Dad and Mother's. What are you going to do?" And I says, "Well, I really don't know at this point." And she said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm at the Ogden train station." "We'll be right there." She had no idea. Dad and Mother had no idea. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I just wanted to surprise them. So Lorraine and Earl come and picked me up. We went out to their place. They loaded everything in the car, and we headed out for Brigham City. I walked up and knocked on the door. Dad came to the door. He grabbed me and hugged me. "Why didn't you let us know you were coming?" And I just wanted to let him know, or didn't want him to know. I was going to want to surprise them. Mother heard the commotion, and she came to the door. And I thought we were going to pick her up off the floor dead. The surprise. She just almost fainted. Dad grabbed her and held her. Anyway, we went in and had a very wonderful Thanksgiving Day. Been a lot of things happen here in that time. Lorraine and Earl had got married. They'd moved out on the railroad, and many things had happened. Thanksgiving morning at the train station. I called Lorraine on the telephone, who lived on 5th Street in Ogden at the time, Lorraine and Earl. And they says, "Where are you?" Because I asked them what they were going to do for Thanksgiving. She says, "Oh, we're going up to Dad and Mother's. What are you going to do?" And I says, "Well, I really don't know at this point." And she said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm at the Ogden train station." "We'll be right there." And they were there. I think there's two things. One, keep yourself morally clean. The second one, live the standards of the church. Become a man. You are what you say. If you get through that point, of that being what you say, then you have to learn that everything you do throughout your life that may not be right above board will haunt you to the day you die. It was being in the service, watching the people, watching the guys, seeing how they changed from fairly nice people to rough, very rough individuals. Immoral, could care less about anyone else, chasing with women, doing the many things there that you should not do. The drinking, you name it, you live with everything you have done. Everything you do, you will live with it until the day you die. I'm not there yet, but I am still living with many of the things. I met my first wife in high school. I was a senior, she was a freshman. My three buddies and I all met women girls who really knew each other real well. And so between the four of us and the four of the women, we were always together. I got back on Thanksgiving Day. The bishopric came to see us one day. My first wife, Phyllis, was there visiting. The bishop came in and chit-chatted for a few minutes, and he says, "Milo, I'm here to call you on a mission. Would you like to go on a mission?" I turned to Phyllis, and she said, "If you go on the mission, I won't be here when you get back. I won't wait." She had waited throughout 3 years of World War II, and she said, "I won't wait." Well, we already had our wedding announcement all made out, and it had already been mailed, and it would have been a real mess to have gone, so I said, "Well, Bishop, I guess I won't be going then." Biggest mistake I ever made in my life. I should have gone on that mission. Marriage was supposed to be forever, and we wanted that type of marriage. Logan was an hour's drive away, and we got married in the Logan Temple. Well, Dick and Nelda, one of the four of us, they had just got married ahead of us, and they had just come home from their honeymoon while we were gone. And they heard that we were home, and they come up and they says, "Well, hey, why don't you come and go with us, and we'll go back up to Yellowstone and finish our honeymoon and yours too." Okay. So the four of us, all newlyweds, went up there, set our tent up. We all four slept in the tent and gone up to Mammoth Hot Springs. And Dick wanted to get back and go fishing. It was long after dark when we got back to Fishing Bridge. The two women had gone to bed, and we pulled up, and where the headlights of the car showed on the tent, we got out and made like giant monsters. Well, we did pretty good because we scared them both half to death. Neither one of them slept much the rest of the night. But Dick and I slept very well. Didn't choose to. The Indian agent for the church stopped by one day, and when he stopped by, he says, "I have a little Indian boy that needs a home, and I have been told that you are someone that could take care of it, could do it. He said, would you be against having an Indian child in your home? And I says, why? They're flesh and blood, just the same as I am. And that was where it ended. About 2 months later, we received a phone call. The boy that has been selected to live in your home will be at the BYU at such and such a date at this time, and we'll see you there. So, did I choose it? I don't know. We were all there at the BYU to pick up all the Indian people. All of a sudden, everyone was gone, and here we were sitting, and that was it. In just a few minutes, the person in charge of it, Brother Hadley, came out and he says, I've been scared to call you back there because I was afraid that you would tell me no, you didn't want him. But he said, when I went to the reservation, everywhere I went, here was this little boy that had no clothes. Actually, he had a pair of Levi's. It was nothing but threads. And he was always there looking and listening. And he said, I asked him who his parents were, and he pointed them out to me. And I asked him, would you like to go to a white school? And he said, yes. He went and talked to his mother and his dad, and his dad was the first one to say yes. We would like him to go. But the mother then, after just a minute, said yes. And she hurried and got them all together. She washed all of his clothes that he had, put them in a cardboard box with a rope tied around it for his everything he owned. We picked him up on the way home. He looked out the window and he pointed and says, how? And I turned to Phyllis and I said, well, he knows something. Went a little further and there was a horse out in the field. Horse! Good. We got home and my boy, our boy Ken, had been in a skiing accident and broke a leg, and he was there in a wheelchair. And as we went in, I herded David in ahead of us, and he started in, and I followed him right close, and I says, David, this is Ken. Ken, this is David. And David took over, or Ken took over. I was never so proud of a kid in my life as that day. He took him over. He had him all ready to go to school and everything else. We took him to school the first day, and the teacher didn't know if she wanted to take him because he just didn't know anything. But he learned fast. He learned enough that we put him through 12 years of school. At the end of that, when he graduated from high school, he went back to the reservation. He called me one day, and he said, hey, Dad, I'll bet I got a better car than you. And I says, I'll bet you do too. I'll bet I make more money than you do. I'll bet you have and do. And he says, well, Dad, I got to tell you one thing. If it hadn't have been for you taking me into your home, putting me through school, I would never have the job I have. He says, I am the chief engineer at the Navajo Power Station. And it all came because you opened your arms to someone that had nothing and welcomed me in, gave me the schooling, I now have that kind of job. That, just things like that, you look back at your life, hey, every penny you spent raising them was worth it. Kevin, they came to our home and asked us if we would like to adopt an Indian child. We're Church Relief Society people. With the experience we'd had with David and with his sister Evelyn, we were wide open to it. They brought him up, we adopted him, we had him sealed, we raised him. Then Kim came along and we did the same. Kim, I don't want to say this because it'll throw a cast on Phyllis. It isn't very nice. I'll put it this way. She taught them, both of them, to drink alcohol and to smoke. We ended up in a divorce because Phyllis had turned into a drunkard herself. And there was too many problems came about all the time. Fights, her hitting, and it finally got to the point where I told her, the next time that happens, I'm leaving. I will not be here. The boys or not, I will not be here. I'll be out of this house. It happened. His heart exploded. He had heart trouble, and it just blew up, and he died then. Mother died from a broken heart. Dad being gone, and she longed for him. So didn't choose to. The Indian agent for the church stopped by one day, and when he stopped by, he says, I have a little Indian boy that needs a home, and I have been told that you are someone that could take care of it, could do it. He said, would you be against having an Indian child in your home? And I says, why? They're flesh and blood, just the same as I am. And that was where it ended. About 2 months later, we received a phone call. The boy that has been selected to live in your home will be at the BYU at such and such a date at this time, and we'll see you there. So, did I choose it? I don't know. We were all there at the BYU to pick up all the Indian people. All of a sudden, everyone was gone, and here we were sitting, and that was it. In just a few minutes, the person in charge of it, Brother Hadley, came out, and he says, I've been scared to call you back there because I was afraid that you would tell me no, you didn't want him. But he said, when I went to the reservation, everywhere I went, here was this little boy that had no clothes. Actually, he had a pair of Levi's. It was nothing but threads. And he was always there looking and listening. And he said, I asked him who his parents were, and he pointed them out to me. And I asked him, would you like to go to a white school? And he said, yes. He went and talked to his mother and his dad, and his dad was the first one to say yes. We would like him to go. But the mother then, after just a minute, said yes. And she hurried and got them all together. She washed all of his clothes that he had, put them in a cardboard box with a rope tied around it for his everything he owned. We picked him up on the way home. He looked out the window and he pointed and says, "How?" And I turned to Phyllis and I said, well, he knows something. Went a little further and there was a horse out in the field. Horse! Good. We got home and my boy, our boy, Kim, had been in a skiing accident and broke a leg. And he was there in a wheelchair. And as we went in, I herded David in ahead of us, and he started in, and I followed him right close, and I says, "David, this is Ken. Ken, this is David." And David took over, or Ken took over. I was never so proud of a kid in my life as that day. He took him over. He had him all ready to go to school and everything else. We took him to school the first day, and the teacher didn't know if she wanted to take him because he just didn't know anything. But he learned fast. He learned enough that we put him through 12 years of school. At the end of that, when he graduated from high school, he went back to the reservation. He called me one day. He said, "Hey, Dad, I'll bet I got a better car than you." And I says, "I'll bet you do too. I'll bet I make more money than you do." "I'll bet you have and do." And he says, "Well, Dad, I got to tell you one thing. If it hadn't have been for you taking me into your home, putting me through school, I would never have the job I have." He says, "I am the chief engineer at the Navajo Power Station. And it all came because you opened your arms to someone that had nothing and welcomed me in, gave me the schooling. I now have that kind of job." That, just things like that, you look back at your life, hey, every penny you spent raising them was worth it. They came to our home and asked us if we would like to adopt an Indian child.
Who was they?
The Church Relief Society people. With the experience we'd had with David and with his sister Evelyn, we were wide open to it. They brought him up, we adopted him, we had him sealed, we raised him. Then Kim came along and we did the same. Kim, I don't want to say this because it'll throw a cast on Phyllis. It isn't very nice. I'll put it this way. She taught them, both of them, to drink alcohol and to smoke. We ended up in a divorce because Phyllis had turned into a drunkard herself. And there was too many problems came about all the time. Fights, her hitting, and it finally got to the point where I told her, the next time that happens, I'm leaving. I will not be here. The boys or not, I will not be here. I'll be out of this house. It happened. His heart exploded. He had heart trouble, and it just blew up, and he died then. Mother died from a broken heart. Dad being gone, and she longed for him so much that she, more or less, I guess you'd say, willed herself to. It was on December 26th, just as it was finished, Lorraine and Earl from St. George, my older sister, and her husband Earl came walking in. They had been driving from St. George that morning early to get here in fog. Earl had his head poked out of the window watching the yellow line on the road, and that's what kept him on his side of the road. So as a result, they didn't get there till after it was over. The ceremony was over. We left. A short time later, headed out for a honeymoon we were going on. Was going to Yellowstone in the wintertime. I had heard how beautiful it was, and so had she, and we decided that was what we wanted to do. We arrived there in a blizzard. Snow was piled up to the second story of the buildings, and a short time afterwards we had been out looking at things, walking around what we could walk in. Decided that we might as well go to the room. I'd just been in bed for maybe a half hour, and I felt a drop of water hit me in the face. Told her to get up, shoved the bed out of the way as much as we could in that little room. Everything just come down from up above, a gush of water. A troop of Boy Scouts had been up there and messing around, had filled the toilet with toilet paper, stomped it in, kept flushing it, and it finally overflowed and all the water come down through the floor. The manager called the person who usually made the bed. She told him that she couldn't come over, she couldn't get there, and he told her, well, we need you bad. So she came over on a snowmobile, came in and saw what had happened. She went back and reported to the manager. They went up, kicked the scouts out, and said they would never have another troop of scouts or explorers rent a room in there again. We went to see Yellowstone Falls in the middle of the winter because we had heard how beautiful that was. We got just to where we were entering the canyon to go down into where we could see it, and the transmission went out on the snowmobile we were riding in. It was a large snowmobile, took 10 people. The driver had us all get out. He raised the seats and everything up, took the floorboard out, took the top off the transmission, put it into reverse, and backed it out of the canyon that way, and we had to walk out. When we got up to the main road, he said, well, all we can do is go back. So we all got out again. He shifted into second gear, and we started out, back for West Yellowstone. Going down along the river, the snow was so much that sometimes the snowmobile would start sinking with us all, and he would turn and go down and go along the edge of the river for a ways. We finally did get back, but we never did get to see Yellowstone and the falls in the wintertime. We were snowed in. We couldn't get out. We had to wait for 2 days for them to finally get the road opened up. We headed for home. It was still snowing, but not like the blizzard had been. We arrived home, and that was actually our first 2 or 3 days of our marriage. My real good buddy that we had gone to school with had just arrived back. Now this isn't the first day. My good buddy and his wife had come home from their honeymoon. And they came over and says, "What happened?" And we told him, and he says, "Well, let's go back." Okay, so we went to the south entrance of Yellowstone. We slept in an open tent, two young married couples. Slept inside this tent for the time we were there. When it was finally over that trip, we come back home, and that was our honeymoon. The house where you were all living at the time had a lot of ghosts. And I don't mean ghosts from the other side, I mean ghosts from this side. We both decided and felt that it would be better if we moved out of that house. And one day, I had a service call at this house in Roy to go to it. And as I drove up, I liked the looks of it. It had a for sale sign out in front. And when I went in, I asked the lady if she minded if I looked through it. And she said, "Well, I'm not supposed to let you, but yes, you may." So I walked through it, and I really liked what I saw. But it wasn't large enough for 6 children, 5 children. I went back that night and told your mother, told Georgia about it. And she said, "Well, I'd like to see it." So I made an appointment. We came out. She saw it. She said, "Yes, I like it. I want it." So we decided, okay, we would do it. We made the down payment on it. I sold my snowmobile that I had at the time. And she took some of the money she had. We put it together and made the down payment on the house. We moved in. A few days later, hung curtains, or hung sheets up down the basement and made rooms for different ones to sleep in different rooms. If with sheets there was a basement down, a bathroom down there. And so we got by, and I told you, all of you, that I would get busy and would build the rooms. We built 3 rooms in the basement plus the fruit room, storage room. So it took a while to do it. Oh, and the bathroom, because there was no bathroom down there when we moved in. I liked where I had been working, Lowe's Hardware. They were getting ready to move up to close businesses. They owned the warehouse where Reed Brothers finally ended up being, J.G. Reed and Company. And they also owned the place over on Washington, and they decided they were going to close up. And so that's the reason why I began looking. And one day the gentleman from Westinghouse came over, as he usually did once a month, and he says, "Would you think of moving to a different job?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd think about it if it was worthwhile." And he says, "Well, go over and talk to Boyd Reed at Reed Brothers." So I did. Boyd liked me right from the beginning, and I did him. He says, "Milo, I won't give you an increase. I won't allow you to have an increase in your wages over what you're making at Lowe's." He said, "If you come knowing that you're coming at the same wages. After a month or 2, we will sit down and work out a plan." Well, I trusted him and said, okay. I went over. I worked there 2 months. He said, "Let's go up to my office." We went up to his office, and he made me a deal that was almost double what I was getting at Lowe's. And so it was a good move. I enjoyed it. I worked there for about 35 years. Finally, Boyd asked me if I'd like to buy the service department, and I told him yes. He sat down, he says, okay, you inventory everything that you think you can use. You pay me what we paid for it. I knew the price of all of it, what we paid. He said, you tell me how much there is, you give me that much money, and it's It was very easy. She was my secretary. She took care of ordering the parts that we needed. She took the service calls. She routed me out. People knew when I was coming. It was a very rewarding relationship for several years. When I would come home, she would leave at about noon, 1 o'clock. She wanted to be home when you guys got home from school. And she would leave and go home. And I was routed out on the calls. I worked until I finished them, and then I went home. Ken came down and started working for me, and he liked the work. Boyd hired him and ended up sending him to Salt Lake to run a service down there at a store they had opened up in Salt Lake, and then decided to close it. And Ken came back. I worked there for myself for, I would say, about 40 years. They sold the buildings, and the building I was in, the new owner came in and asked me how much I was paying rent. I told him. He says, not enough, I'll see you tomorrow. And he came in the next day and had doubled the rent. And I told him, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I will move out as fast as I can. One of the help that I had had for a while, and he had used to work for Sears and Roebuck, and they had called him back after he had quit and had made him an offer he couldn't refuse, and he went back there. He came in one day and said, Milo, I understand you've got to move. And I said, yep, don't know where I'm going at this point. He says, well, why don't you come to work for me at Sears? Now, he had worked for me, and he had liked me as an employer, and he knew what I knew. And so I went to Sears. They immediately put me over 5 other guys, which didn't go over very well. I had enough people calling me here at home, at my home. I was making more money, as much money as I made down there, and I was working from home on my own. I went over to A1 Appliance Service, and I'll work for you. And he says, good, the truck's sitting out there, it's all loaded with parts, take it home with you. I started out the next morning. I worked for them until I retired fully. I had several customers that were not only customers, they were friends, of which Suzanne was one of them. I took my last call at 82, and I was retired. I do not remember us having a real argument or disagreement, except when it came to what one of you did. And I had no business saying anything about it. She was going to take care of those things, and she did. Being a stepdad is hard. When boys and girls get to about 13 years of age, from there until approximately 17. I was a teenager once myself. I went through it then with my folks. But they always, as all of you did, if you did something that I felt was very wrong and I went to say anything about it, I would always be told, "You're not my dad." Pretty soon it gets to the point, being a stepfather, to where, okay, you try to hold it all in. And it's hard being a stepfather. You all married. And after you were married, all those hard things disappeared. And I was so thankful, so very thankful for each one of you as one of my children. I love every one of you. You all are my children, just as much as not. You I raised from the time you were approximately 1 year old. I raised you from then until you left home. And being a stepdad, I wouldn't recommend a person going out and deciding he was going to be a stepdad, but going into a marriage as I did, with your mother having 6 children, people told me I was crazy, that it would never work. It did work. We made it work. She would write out my paycheck. She would write out her paycheck. I would give her mine. She would go and deposit it in the bank. I knew that at the end of the month, there would still be some money there. I knew that the bills would be paid. I knew that the tithing would be paid. That was one of the problems in my first marriage. The tithing didn't get paid. And I didn't know about it. I always thought I had paid a full tithing. I have been a full tithe payer all of my life, and will be till the day I die. All of my children I love dearly. They're your dad, you're his children too, by blood. But so help me, Hannah, you're my children by me being there to help raise you. And being a stepdad, if you marry into it, you've got to make the best of it, and the best of it comes in the later years. It's great. There is not one thing except fist fighting, cuffing each other, such as that, being very mean at it. Or somebody stealing money, stepping out, breaking a marriage. Other than for those reasons, there is not one mountain that you will run into that you can't climb if you wish to. If you don't wish to, if you can't definitely get along and work it out, there's a lot of people out there who you can find a way to make it work. But there is a love that becomes so much deeper than that first sexual love, if you can overcome the pitfalls of that love and get into the second stage of it, where it becomes a brain love, should I say? I loved your mother very, very deeply. Had she lived, we would still be married and still be happy. She didn't. The cancer took her. It took several years to finish paying off all of the bills that were left from that. Your mother had done one thing before she passed away. She and Dizella and Pete and myself had gone to Wendover several times. We had gone on trips together, as you all knew and know. They paid the way. If we would take them with us, they would pay the way. And one day we stopped in, well, your mom and her mother had been pooling whatever they won. They had been pooling it all the time. And Pete and I pooled it. The biggest one that I ever got was about $1,700, where I split with him. He took half, I took half. Your mother and her mother, Dizella, did the same thing. When she passed away, she gave a key to her vault to Patty and Ken, and told them to go to that vault and get the money out of it that was in it and give it to me. We had bought this three-wheel scooter for her, and she'd only had it, about 3 months, as I remember. That could be wrong, but it's close. And Patty and Ken came to me and says, "This Mother told us to give to you when she passed away." And I opened the envelope, and in it was a letter telling me that she knew I would have things I had to pay for with her and her cancer, but she was very happy that she could pay off that three-wheel scooter, and I would not have to pay it off. She has saved the money very diligently, $1 at a time, until she had it. That was what our marriage was like. I loved her, she loved me. And we would have still been married if only she could have lived. I enjoyed the last years of her life, just taking care of her. I thoroughly enjoyed it. All of a sudden, you realize that you aren't just responsible for yourself anymore. That you are responsible for the 1, 2, or 3 others, how many there are. And as a result of it, you change your life and your lifestyle to accommodate them. Before Ken was born, we could do anything we wanted. Once he was there, you had responsibility. You couldn't just leave him and run. You cut down on a lot of things that you normally would do. in order to take care of them and see that they're taken care of. You suddenly realize you don't have enough money to do everything that you want to do. All of a sudden, you have to find room for everyone. You never had to do that before. You never had to worry about it.